One man controlled 20 animals with a single rope. For 6 years, across the hottest desert in North America, not a single mule was lost, not a single wagon broke down. That's the story you haven't heard about the 20-mule team, the one that has nothing to do with laundry detergent commercials and everything to do with the most sophisticated freight operation ever attempted in the American West. The conventional story says these were just mules hauling borax. The evidence shows something far more remarkable. A precision instrument of flesh, iron, and mathematics that outperformed every piece of technology thrown against it, including the steam engine that was supposed to replace it. When that engine broke down in the desert, the mules had to tow it home. The machines of the Industrial Revolution couldn't match what 2 men and 20 animals accomplished through pure mastery of logistics, animal psychology, and desert survival. Here's what the records actually show. October 1883. Furnace Creek, Death Valley, California. The temperature hovers around 110 degrees, even though it's technically autumn. A man named J.W.S. Perry stands on a ridge overlooking a landscape that looks more like the surface of Mars than anything in the continental United States. The valley floor shimmers white with salt and alkite deposits. 282 feet below sea level, the lowest point in the Western Hemisphere, sits a fortune in white crystals that prospector Aaron Winters discovered 2 years earlier. Aaron had been living with his wife Rosie in a hovel at Ash Meadows. One visitor described it as close against a hill, one side half hewn out of rock, with a thatched roof. A wandering prospector named Harry Spiller showed them how to test for borax using alcohol and sulfuric acid. "She burns green, Rosie," Aaron reportedly shouted when the flame confirmed his suspicions. "We're rich by God." He sold his claim to William T. Coleman for $20,000, about $600,000 in today's money. Perry isn't a mining engineer. He's a trained pharmacist who somehow became superintendent of the Harmony Borax Works. His boss, Coleman, has given him an impossible assignment. Figure out how to move 10 tons of refined borax 165 miles across this wasteland to the railroad at Mojave. Borax wasn't just a curiosity, it was becoming essential to American industry, used in glass manufacturing, enamel glazes, metallurgy, and increasingly as a household cleaner. The European supply came from Turkey and Tibet at prices that made American deposits valuable, even in locations that seemed designed to kill anyone who tried to reach them. The existing freight contractors use 8 to 12 horses and move maybe 2 tons at a time. The math doesn't work. At those volumes, transportation costs would consume the profits entirely. Perry needs to triple the payload. The only way to do that is to build the largest wagons ever pulled by draft animals and find a team capable of hauling them. The wagons Perry designed were engineering marvels that most people today couldn't even lift a piece of. J.T. Delameter of Mojave built them at a cost of $900 each, roughly $27,000 in today's money per wagon. The rear wheels stood 7 feet tall, higher than most men, and weighed 1,000 pounds each. 1-inch thick iron tires, 8 inches wide, wrapped solid oak rims built from split spokes that measured 5.5 inches at the base, tapering to 4 inches at the point. The forward axle trees were solid steel bars, 3.25 inches square. The rear axles were even more massive at 3.5 inches square. The wagon beds measured 16 feet long by 6 feet deep by 4 feet wide. Constructed entirely from solid oak with barn doors at the rear for unloading, and weighed 7,800 pounds empty. 2 of these behemoths would be linked together, the first called the trailer, the second called the tender or back action, plus a water wagon carrying over 200 gallons to keep the animals alive across 60-mile stretches without natural water. Only 5 complete wagon sets were ever built. Total weight when loaded, 73,200 pounds, 36.6 tons. The question Perry faced wasn't whether wagons could be built this large. The question was whether any combination of animals could pull them. Remember that number, 73 or 200 pounds, because it becomes critical when we reach the steam engine. The solution came from a teamster named Ed Stiles, who had been driving 12 mule teams for Eagle Borax, a competing operation that a Frenchman named Isidore Dinah had established before taking his own life when the business struggled. Stiles understood something about mules that most people overlook. They're not stubborn, they're intelligent. A horse will work itself to death if you ask it to. A mule refuses to destroy itself. A mule conserves its energy until energy is needed, then delivers precisely what the task requires. That intelligence could be trained. The animals themselves were American-bred hybrids, female horses bred with male donkeys, with major production centers in Missouri, turning out animals specifically designed for grueling labor. Mules can survive on less water and forage than horses. They can withstand greater heat. They have greater endurance over distance, and they're far less likely to injure themselves through panic or poor judgment. Stiles and Perry combined an 8-mule team with a 12-mule team and added 2 draft horses as wheelers, the pair closest to the wagon. The horses provided the brute strength to start 73,200 pounds moving from a dead stop. Each wheeler could weigh more than a ton, roughly twice the weight of an average mule, and they could throw that mass into the collar to break the wagons free from rest. They could also withstand the jarring impact of the heavy wagon tongue that would have injured smaller animals. But the horses couldn't handle the desert itself. That's what the mules were for. Here's where the operation becomes genuinely astonishing. The team stretched over 180 feet from the lead mules to the rear of the water wagon. An 80-foot steel chain ran from the first pair of mules all the way back to the water wagon, with each pair of mules and all 3 wagons attached to this single continuous chain. The driver, the muleskinner, sat on the left wheel horse, 120 feet behind the lead animals. He couldn't even use his 9-foot whip with its 22-foot lash on the leaders from that distance. When he needed to get a lead mule's attention, he'd throw pebbles at it. His aim had to be good. So how did one man control 20 animals across terrain that would kill a careless driver? The jerk line. A single cotton rope, 120 feet long, soft, pliable, and strong, threaded through a ring on the left side of each mule's collar and attached to the bit of the left lead mule. This was the driver's telegraph line, one contemporary account called it. One steady pull on that line meant turn left. A series of sharp jerks meant turn right. The lead mule would feel the command and respond, and the mule beside her, the off-leader, would follow her motion. That's it. 2 commands transmitted through 120 feet of rope to animals standing so far away the driver needed to throw rocks to get their attention. Everything else depended on the animals knowing their names, their positions, and their jobs. Each mule had to respond instantly to commands addressed to it specifically. Each had to know what pull and stop meant. Each had to be strong and willing to do its share of the work without direction. The mules were organized into 5 categories, each with specific training requirements. The leaders, always 2 mares, were considered the smartest animals in the team. They wore bells on their harness so the animals behind could hear where they were heading, especially useful in dust storms or when navigating blind corners. Behind the leaders came the swing teams, 5 pairs of mules that needed to know their names and respond to pull and stop, but didn't require advanced training. They provided the raw pulling power that moved tonnage. But the truly remarkable animals were the pointers, 6s and 8s. 6 mules positioned between the swings and the wheelers. These mules were trained to do something that sounds impossible until you see it. Jump over an 80-foot chain while the wagon is moving. Think about the geometry of turning a 180-foot-long train around a sharp mountain curve. When the lead mules start turning, the chain connecting all the animals would naturally pull straight, cutting across the inside of the curve. That would drag the wagons off the road, off a cliff in many cases. The solution was mechanical precision executed by animals. As the team entered a turn, the pointer mules would literally hop over the chain they were pulling and step sideways, keeping tension on the line while creating the curve the wagons needed to follow. No signals from the driver. No commands. The mules recognized the terrain and executed the maneuver autonomously. One observer described it as watching a machine made of flesh, each part knowing exactly when and how to move. The men who ran these teams weren't cowboys playing at logistics. They were specialists earning wages that reflect their value. A mule skinner earned $100 to $200 per month in the 1880s. To put that in perspective, the average manufacturing worker in America earned roughly $30 per month. A school teacher earned $6 per month. The Chinese laborers who gathered cotton ball borax from the salt flats earned $1.25 per day, minus deductions for company housing and food. The mule skinner made 3 to 5 times the national average wage because he had to be 3 to 5 professionals combined into one person. He was a driver who could control animals 120 feet away by feel through a cotton rope. He was a veterinarian who could diagnose and treat sick mules in the field with no supplies beyond what he carried. He was a blacksmith who could shoe a mule if it threw its iron on sharp rocks 60 miles from the nearest settlement. He was a wheelwright who could repair a 1,000-pound wheel with hand tools, and he was responsible for $15,000 worth of cargo, the equivalent of roughly $500,000 today, on every single trip. His assistant, the swamper, earned $75 per month. The swamper handled the second break, fed and watered the animals, cooked meals, and carried a can of small rocks. When a mule in the middle of the team stopped paying attention, the swamper would pelt it with a pebble. His aim had to be good. One driver named Salty Williams left a vivid record of what those journeys felt like. On hot days, he reported, the mules would go so mad for water that the clank of the water bucket sent them into an uproar of hideous, maimed noises and a tangle of harnessed chains. Salty would curse and yell until they quieted. After his swamper died, the records don't specify how. Salty quit, saying it was too darn hot. But he returned. The call of the land, he said. Something in the desert pulled him back. These 2 men were alone with 20 animals, 36.6 tons of cargo, and 165 miles of terrain that had killed prospectors, immigrants, and entire wagon trains. The valley's name was literal. In 1849, pioneers crossing to the California goldfields had died here in numbers sufficient to christen it Death Valley. The temperature regularly exceeded 120 degrees in summer. Ground temperatures, the surface the mules walked on, could reach 200 degrees. The official record high of 134 degrees wouldn't be set until 1913, but the 1880s workers didn't need a thermometer to know they were operating in the hottest place on the continent. The route itself reads like a catalogue of deliberate punishment. The teams left Furnace Creek and climbed out of the valley through the Funeral Mountains, a range named for the prospectors buried in its passes. They navigated Wingate Pass, crossed the Panamint Valley, climbed over the Slate Range, dropped into Searles Valley, and finally descended into the Mojave Desert proper before reaching the railroad at Mojave. The trail covered terrain ranging from 282 feet below sea level to over 4,000 feet in elevation. They crossed dry lake beds where the salt crust could cut through iron tires. They climbed grades steep enough that the swamper had to ride the back action brake to keep the wagons from overrunning the team on descents. They navigated curves on mountain passes where one wrong step would send 36 tons of wagon and cargo over the edge. One stretch, 60 miles, had no natural water at all. The company eventually added a 500-gallon auxiliary wagon during summer months to supply dry camps along the route for teams traveling in both directions. The one 200-gallon main tank wasn't luxury. It was survival. An animal requires roughly 10 gallons of water per day in those conditions. 20 animals times 10 days means 2,000 gallons minimum for the team alone, not counting the men. The mathematics of the water wagon determined whether anyone made it home. Every drop had to be calculated. Every mile had to be planned. Perry and Coleman didn't leave survival to chance. The company constructed a network of relay stations across the route. Every 17 miles, one day's travel, the teams would find cabins for the men, corrals for the mules, and feed boxes stocked with hay and grain. Returning teams would carry supplies from Mojave back to these stations, creating a self-sustaining logistics chain. The wagons left Harmony every 4 days, which meant multiple teams were always on the route, always restocking stations, always maintaining the infrastructure that kept the operation viable. This wasn't frontier improvisation. It was industrial scheduling applied to animal power. The results speak in numbers. During 6 years of continuous operation from 1883 to 1889, the 20 mule teams hauled more than 20 million pounds of borax out of Death Valley. That's 10,000 tons moved 165 miles across terrain that killed less prepared travelers. They made approximately 150 round trips per team. And in all that time, across hundreds of crossings through the hottest, driest, lowest point in North America, not a single wagon broke down. Not a single animal died on the trail. 0 mechanical failures. 0 fatalities. The reliability rate exceeds anything achieved by railroad or steamship operations of the same era. When military quartermasters later studied frontier logistics, the 20 mule team operation appeared in their reports as an exemplar of what disciplined freighting could accomplish. The secret wasn't luck or toughness or frontier grit. It was systematic maintenance and absolute attention to equipment condition. Every morning before departure, the mule skinner inspected every piece of harness on every animal, every strap, every buckle, every chain link. A broken piece of equipment 60 miles from help meant dead animals and stranded men. The wagons received similar treatment. Wheels were examined for cracks, axles greased, beds checked for loose boards. The iron tires were fitted by craftsmen who understood that a loose tire in soft sand would come apart and leave a 7-foot wheel immobilized in the middle of nowhere. This wasn't the romanticized West of quick-draw gunfighters. This was industrial discipline applied at the molecular level. And then came the machine that was supposed to end all of it. In 1894, Francis Marion Smith, who had acquired Coleman's Borax properties after Coleman's financial collapse in 1888, decided that technology had advanced far enough to replace the mules. Smith was known as Borax Smith for good reason. He was the greatest promoter the borax industry had ever seen, and he believed in progress. He purchased a steam tractor called Old Dinah, a Daniel Best-built tricycle-type engine with a vertical boiler and gear drive. The machine featured a sprung suspension, 2 coil springs on each side supporting the tractor's weight, plus a 3rd spring on the front wheel assembly, though the travel was severely limited. Probably not more than 2 inches total. It must have been a harsh ride. On paper, the specifications looked superior in every way. Dinah could maintain 3.5 miles per hour, slightly faster than the mule teams. She didn't need water every 17 miles. She carried her own tank. She didn't need feed boxes. She didn't need rest. She was the Industrial Revolution's answer to a problem the Industrial Revolution should have solved decades earlier. What happened next became a punchline that Borax Company executives told for generations. Old Dinah required constant maintenance. Her wheels, designed for agricultural fields, couldn't handle desert sand or rocky grades. Her boiler consumed water at rates that left her stranded between supply points. She broke down repeatedly on her trial runs from the Barate mines to Daggett, a route much shorter and less demanding than the original Death Valley crossing. After 1 year of frustrating attempts to make the technology work, Smith ordered the trial terminated. The mules proved more productive and more reliable than the state-of-the-art steam technology of 1894. But the final insult came in 1904, when Smith tried again. He'd graded a 98-mile tractor road from new Borax mines in Death Valley to the railroad, trying to avoid the expense of building an actual rail line. He brought old Dinah back from storage for one more attempt. She broke down on her first trip, and the mules, the supposedly obsolete, supposedly primitive mules, had to tow the broken steam engine back to town. The photograph of that moment, if it existed, would be the perfect image of technological hubris meeting biological reality. The machines built by human ingenuity couldn't survive conditions that animals and skilled handlers had navigated flawlessly for more than a decade. The 20 mule teams didn't end because they failed. They ended because the Borax deposits at Harmony and Amargosa were exhausted, and new deposits discovered closer to railheads made the long desert crossing unnecessary. By 1889, the teams had moved all the Borax Death Valley's first commercial deposits would yield. The operation closed because it had completed its mission, not because anything better replaced it. When Smith built the Barate and Daggett Railroad in 1898, he was solving a different problem in a different location. The original Death Valley route remained unconquered by any technology of that era. What does this tell us about the conventional story of Western expansion? The popular narrative focuses on gunfighters, cowboys, cavalry charges, the violent, dramatic moments that translate well to film. But the actual opening of the West depended far more on men like J.W.S. Perry, Ed Stiles, and the anonymous muleskinners who made 150 trips through Death Valley without losing a single animal. It depended on solving logistics problems that the most advanced technology of the day couldn't touch. It depended on respecting animal intelligence rather than trying to replace it with steam and iron. The 20-mule team operation also reveals something uncomfortable about American industrial mythology. We tell ourselves that machines always triumph, that technology inevitably displaces animal and human labor, that the arc of progress bends toward mechanization. But in Death Valley in the 1880s and 1890s, that story proved false. The biological system, mules bred for desert conditions, men trained in multiple crafts, a logistics network calibrated to animal needs, outperformed every mechanical alternative until the railroads finally reached the Borax deposits themselves. And even then, the victory belonged to a different machine solving a different problem. The 20 mule teams were never beaten at their own game. The mule skinner profession itself deserves more recognition than history has granted. These weren't the semi-literate drovers of Western movies. They were highly skilled tradespeople who commanded premium wages because their expertise was genuinely rare. The ability to feel a mule's hesitation through 120 feet of cotton rope required years of practice. The ability to diagnose a sick animal in field conditions required genuine veterinary knowledge. The ability to repair a wagon wheel with hand tools required blacksmith training. And the ability to do all of this in temperatures that exceeded 120 degrees while being responsible for $500,000 in cargo required a combination of physical endurance and mental acuity that few modern workers are ever asked to demonstrate. Some of these men became minor celebrities. Bill Parkinson, known as Borax Bill, drove exhibition teams for the Pacific Coast Borax Company's promotional tours. In 1917, he drove an original wagon from Oakland to New York City, a 2-year journey across the continent that made headlines and appeared in President Wilson's inauguration parade. But most mule skinners left no record beyond company payrolls. They did their work, collected their $100 to $200 per month, and vanished into historical obscurity. The Borax they hauled became a household brand. Their skill became a footnote. Only one complete set of the original 5 wagons survives today, displayed at Harmony Borax Works in Death Valley National Park. The wagon sets used in television advertisements and promotional appearances were later reconstructions. The real artifacts, the 7,800-pound oak beds, the 7-foot wheels with 1,000-pound iron tires, mostly succumbed to time and desert conditions. What remains is the record, 6 years. 20 million pounds, 0 mechanical failures, 0 animal deaths. A performance standard that no industrial revolution technology could match, achieved by men earning wages that reflect exactly how valuable their skills really were. The conventional wisdom says the American West was won by railroads and six-shooters. The evidence says it was won by muleskinners and mathematics, by men who understood that moving 36 tons across 165 miles of desert required precision, planning, and partnership with animals who were smarter than the horses that looked more impressive. The 20-mule team wasn't a primitive holdover waiting for technology to replace it. It was a sophisticated system operating at the outer edge of what biological freight could accomplish. A system that succeeded because its designers respected the limits and capabilities of flesh and blood. By 1899, the Pacific Coast Borax Company had spent $100,000, roughly $3.5 million today, refitting the 115-year-old wagons and obtaining new mules for one final appearance, the Rose Parade in Pasadena. It was the last commercial outing for a 20-mule team. The company had long since switched to rail transport. The mules had become marketing props, symbols of a heritage that sold laundry detergent better than any modern spokesman could. But somewhere in that parade, walking along with bells on their harnesses, were animals whose ancestors had done something no steam engine, no tractor, no machine of the 19th century could accomplish. They had crossed Death Valley hundreds of times, carrying civilization's cargo through the hottest landscape on the continent, guided by nothing more than a cotton rope and the voice of a man who knew their names. The Harmony Borax Works sits abandoned today, a quarter-mile off California Highway 190. Tourists can walk a paved interpretive trail through the ruins where Chinese laborers once scraped cotton ball borax from the salt flats. The surviving wagon set, the last of its kind, rests nearby, its wood still solid after 140 years, its iron still sound. Ranger talk explained how the operation worked, usually focusing on the number 20, as if the mules were the whole story. But the real story is simpler and more impressive. One rope, 2 men, and a logistics system that succeeded where the Industrial Revolution failed. The machines came later. The mules were never beaten.